Welcome to Shitposting from Golgotha. When I first began writing the scripts for this channel, my initial intention was to ultimately make a mockery of political ideologies. I regret to announce, however, that recently politics has become somewhat of a parody of itself, making it rather difficult to mock. Not impossible, just difficult. Where my goals lay are with the more social aspects of politics and how they have built a pathway into the mainstream media. You will hear many political commentators on YouTube and Twitter referencing the mainstream media, and more importantly, their biases regarding a vast proportion of today's societal standards, by which I mean society's expectations, and can be categorised by the way political correctness has changed one's rights to freedom from abuse and turned it into a freedom from criticism. This has occurred irrespective of its validity and has been perfectly narrated by social justice warriors in their quest for safe spaces and trigger warnings on everything. What do they want to be protected from in these safe spaces though? The foremost obvious answer is protection from any opinion or bias that might contradict their own preconceived notions. In their little world, what they expect is to be able to grow into adults without ever meeting any form of adversity, debate or confrontation when it comes to what they believe. Most places in the civilized world have provided the means to shelter oneself from these allegedly harmful altercations. For instance, if somebody says something to you that you don't like or agree with on Facebook or Twitter, you can simply block them. If you post videos on YouTube, you can not only block people entirely, but disable comments to ensure that you get the views but none of the flack. Let's be fair though, if your quarrels are spreading further than social network platforms, then is it not just as simple to get up and walk away from somebody saying something you might not like? Having said that, if you are stating something that you absolutely know might get disagreed with, you've either got to be ready to defend yourself or not say it publicly. It really is that simple. However, this is apparently not enough. The thing is, in order to know somebody is saying something that you don't want to hear, you first must know what it is they are saying, and suddenly the slightly squeaky wheels of civil liberties come to a grinding halt. It was a bright, cold day in April, and the clocks were striking 13. That is the opening sentence of George Orwell's final novel, 1984. Many references found in modern pop culture originated from this book, not least the terms Big Brother and Room 101. Unfortunately, never had the stakes set out in this masterpiece been higher, and the dark references made are ever more relevant. It seems that the regressive left and their fanatic arm of social justice warriors do in fact agree with me on this, however, for very different reasons, and reasons that are little more than conjecture and pure hypocrisy. This meme, branded with an assumed quote by Orwell himself, has been making its rounds through social media recently, shared mostly by the regressive left, and attached a more personal quote along with the lines of, "It's happening. Is it really?" The first thing that needs addressing is the feigned quote in the meme. I have read 1984 twice, and most recently less than 2 months ago, thus I can safely say that the general gist of the story is still rather fresh in my mind. Did you even read my book? Well, did you? It seems to me that if you are a disgruntled Bremainer or salty SJW Hillary voter, then there can only be two outcomes from this meme. The first being that you have read 1984 and completely misunderstood it, meaning that you are fucking dumb. The second is that you've fallen into the trap of only understanding the common misconceptions that are purported about 1984. You in fact have never read it, therefore you are a liar. Interestingly, both potentialities are synonymous with pretty much every social justice movement out there, but that's something for another day. In many of his pre-war essays, Orwell demonstrated a fondness of socialism, particularly in The Lion and the Unicorn. However, in his own explanation of 1984, he claimed that the then current form of British politics would not survive the Second World War. More importantly, that he had witnessed how socialism was not quite as simple as the textbook definition, and saw Big Brother as a perversion of socialism. Terribly awful for socialism and its subscribers that textbook definitions never quite carry out as expected, and with the rise of socialist and communist nations leading up to and during the Second World War, bearing witness to how socialism was playing out in developed countries such as Japan, Italy, China and the USSR, was somewhat unavoidable. The following is a short clip of Conservative MEP Daniel Hannan remarking at the Oxford Union debate after being questioned by a member of the audience about how socialism had played out in the United Kingdom in the 1950s and the 1960s. It highlights why textbook definitions are faltered in themselves.
Thank you. I want to tackle this idea because it runs through the debate that somehow on this side we are more materialistic, greedier, less humane, that we have less by way of fellow feeling and sympathy than those on the other side. If you contrast socialist and capitalist economies, you see precious little evidence of that. But for what it's worth, I am a conservative politician. I spend a lot of my time with libertarians, conservatives, and free marketers of every stripe. I can tell you, hand on heart, I have never met anyone who derives more pleasure from a healthy bank balance than from listening to Beethoven, or playing with his children, or going for a walk in the country. But what is it that enables us to do those things? It's economic progress. The fact that you have a dishwasher and don't have to spend all your time doing the washing by hand means you can go for that walk in the country. The fact that you've got a car and don't have to queue up at the tram station means you have more time to listen to Beethoven's symphonies. The fact that you don't have to spend 6 weeks working just to feed your children means you can spend the weekend playing with them. And where did those economic advances come from? From the system that unlocked the inventiveness of a creative people, that tapped into the unlimited potential of human innovation, and that raised our species to a standard of living that a couple of generations ago would have been unimaginable. Now that has happened for about 1 billion people in the world, those of us who can afford the car, those of us who can afford the dishwashers. There are 6 billion people, I'm sorry, I haven't got any more time. There are 6 billion people who cannot afford the cars and the dishwashers. But they will. They will as free exchange and specialization and comparative advantage run their course, raising people to a higher and higher standard of living, unless we go down the road of Cuba or Zimbabwe or any other socialist country, because this motion is that it doesn't work. Don't make the mistake of judging socialism as a textbook theory, but judging capitalism by its necessarily imperfect outcomes. Judge like with like. In the real world, you find me a functioning socialist country that has delivered more than a free market alternative.
The rest of Mr. Hannan's comments are thoroughly interesting, and the link is in the description. Do urge you to watch. Anyway, as a fond lover of Orwell, I strongly suggest that everybody should read 1984 as soon as possible. On that note, I shall grant a spoiler alert. I am about to describe content from 1984 that might ruin the story should you so desire to read it, so do continue at your own prerogative. Big Brother is a fictional character that is alleged to be watching you, not however through closed-circuit television or the like, but through a contraption known as the telescreen. These telescreens are everywhere, and are monitoring your actions, facial expressions, body language and tone of voice, language and of course what you are saying at all times. Also, the party would have you believe. All stamped with the ever-famous quote, "Big Brother is watching you." The party are simply the overseers of all operations carried out in Britain, named Airstrip 1 in the story, and have assumed ultimate control over everything, including what you are allowed to think. Production and distribution of goods and services, the news, all forms of media, food and drink, luxuries, etc. The point is that there is no higher power and no power to hire. The party is separated into 4 factions, however for the purpose of this video we only need to reference 2 of them, the Ministry of Truth and the Ministry of Love. The story's protagonist, Winston Smith, works for the Ministry of Truth, and ultimately it's his job to alter news articles from the past in order to suit the current narrative of the party. It is more the Ministry of Love that plays an important role in all of this, however, and their fascist military arm, the Thought Police, whose responsibility it is to track down those who may be showing a matter of discourse or anyone who displays signs of dissidence. An entity not far from the realms of our friends, the SJWs, and what they would have imposed if they could. So what's this common misconception about 1984 that's so important, you might be asking yourselves right now? Well, many believe that the story is centred around the general premise of CCTV and the intrusions upon our civil liberties, which, although might be true, 1984 delves far deeper into the dystopian society that forms as a result of these impositions. Here is the point where I tell you that today's social justice warriors and their influence upon society bears more than enough similarities with the fictional thought police for me to make the comparison. The most flagrant of these similarities is their desire to quash any freedom of thought. For today we can no longer criticise religion, call a woman beautiful, call a woman, conserve any traditional values, speak in support of any kind of right-wing politics, claim that an Islamic terrorist commits his atrocities because of his religion, and the list goes on and fucking on. Social justice warriors aim to achieve their peace through sheer belligerence, hostility, aggression and contention. They turn up at speeches and forums where they know outright that the speakers are not confined to their social justice echo chambers just to be antagonising and pugnacious. This results in a complete derailment of discourse in respect to the plan. In other words, nobody really gets to put their opinions forward, they merely end up in an unproductive argument with some fucking regressive crybaby who gets triggered the moment they hear an opinion that diverges from those taught by their gender studies professors. Freedom of speech guarantees the individual the right to their own views without the course of justice or government imposing upon them. Obviously, this does not entitle the individual a free pass for hate speech or the like. And although many see the limitations imposed upon the freedom of speech as political correctness, one must first recognise that some views and opinions expressed otherwise do impose upon another person's civil liberties, i.e. the right to fucking exist. There is nothing that social justice warriors want more than to convince everybody who isn't a white, cisgender, heterosexual male that they are a victim of something. Much more importantly, that whatever it is they are a victim of, it is perpetrated by these white, cisgender males. In fact, we don't even need to call them that, for everything in the world that SJWs disagree with is an aggression by the patriarchy. Everything that they cannot do is a patriarchal standard that everyone should ignore, and fuck me if you're a female who disagrees with them, well, they have an answer for that too. Internalised misogyny. Whatever the fuck that means. I now return to the meme I mentioned earlier. Yes, that's the one. The way this has been thrown around for the last month or so is in blatant reference to the string of right-wing political victories in recent years. How can I know this? Well, as I also mentioned before, it's only those who I know support the left to have shared it. The party and Big Brother are products of a totalitarian socialist government, even described by Orwell himself in 1984. They are a successor to a group known as INGSOC, Newspeak for English Socialism. Orwell made no attempt to hide the fact that both 1984 and Animal Farm were creative ways to make scathing attacks on socialist governments during the Second World War. So much so that Animal Farm was initially banned from release through fears that it could sour the enemy of my enemy relationship Britain had forged with Russia. As you can see, I made the point at the beginning of this episode that if you have been spreading this meme, you have either read 1984 and are stupid, or you haven't read 1984 and you are a liar. Therefore leaving you with two options. Stop insinuating that the growing strength of the right wing will lead to the dystopian society of Oceania outlined in 1984, or assign yourself to one of the aforementioned traits. But it was alright. Everything was alright. The struggle was finished. He had won the victory over himself. He loved Big Brother. Now, I urge you, start a debate or an argument, form your own opinions, not those that the left-wing biased media tells you to, not what your gender studies professor teaches you, make your beliefs personal to you. More importantly, do not be afraid of offending people, because there is nothing in any constitution of any country that I have been to that entitles you to not be offended, for it is entirely subjective. On the other hand, if we allow social justice warriors to win and continue the way they are going, laws will be made on subjectivity, and we will be a step closer to the dystopian society written in 1984. As always, I am the Excremental, and this shit's going to need 2 flushes.